way down south in Charleston, South Carolina, in the year 1853, William Steph wrote himself a song. The song was a hymn that old Steph just knew would live forever and immortalize him. The fact is, it had a little success, but only as a camp meeting song, and referred to by the Bible Belt evangelists as a good shouter, and was soon lost in obscurity. Old Steph titled his song, Canaan's Happy Shore, and it went something sort of like this.
Say, brothers, will you meet us on Canaan's happy shore? Say, brothers, will you meet us on Canaan's happy shore? Say, brothers, will you meet us on Canaan's happy shore to watch the Jordan roll? Say, brothers, will you meet us on Canaan's happy shore? Say, brothers, will you meet us on Canaan's happy shore? Say, brothers, will you meet us on Canaan's happy shore to watch the Jordan roll?
Now, the song as such did die. That is, the words or lyrics that were to immortalize Bill Steph died. But the melody had a certain vibrant ring to it that caused it to catch on. And soon enough, tinkers, tailors, soldiers, and sailors were singing their own lusty and ribald lyrics to Steph's melody. In a short time, several vulgar versions of the song were known the length and breadth of our young nation, all to Mr. Steph's dismay and disappointment. In his effort to glorify his God, he had created an instrument that base men used in an opposite effect. He had been a dismal failure. A young Vermonter named Thomas Bishop, traveling in the South, had picked up the tune, sang it, and tucked it away in a corner of his mind. Later on, when war clouds began to gather and darken over our land, he hurried back home and in a burst of patriotism joined the Massachusetts Infantry Battalion stationed at Fort Warren in Boston Harbor. Not long after Tom joined up, the fanatic abolitionist John Brown made his infamous attack on Harper's Ferry in 1859. This deed and its cause so affected Tom Bishop that he decided he would attempt to dramatize it in song. Calling on his memory for a melody he had heard once, he put together some words that fit it, and thus evolved the spirited marching song of the Tiger Battalion, John Brown's Body.
John Brown's body lies a-moldering in his grave. John Brown's body lies a-moldering in his grave. John Brown's body lies a-moldering in his grave. His soul goes marching on. His soul goes marching.
So, old Steph's tune was born again, probably disappointing him even further. A song from the South by a Southerner used to arouse the anti-slave camps in the North? I'm sure it appeared to a man of Steph's obvious piety that God was against him. The war of brother against brother soon broke out in full fury, and the gray-clad rebels were soon screaming at the very gates of our nation's capital. The Tiger Battalion was pulled from Boston Harbor, and early one morning in 1862, they disembarked from troop trains in Washington and were soon on the march to the front in defense of our capital city. It was a dismal, dreary day indeed. A light rain fell steadily down as the troops marched through the wet streets, dampening their spirits as well as their powder. As marching soldiers are wont to do, even under the severest conditions, they broke into their marching song, and the rollicking melody rolled out in a crescendo sound. But also, like most soldiers, they had created some new words of their own, yet again, for old Steph's melody. Lusty, filthy lyrics that were as offensive as any of the earlier ribald versions. As they sung by the Capitol steps, three figures stood silhouetted there in the fog, and embarrassed by the lewd words. When the one in the middle, a woman, turned to one of the men beside her and said painfully, "Why is it that young men must go forth to die with such obscenities on their lips?" and filth as their battle hymn. The great man, tall, gaunt, and broodingly somber in his stovepipe hat, leaned down to her and answered, in his characteristic and compassionate way, "Why don't you do something about it?" The sudden and stark challenge stirred her, and as their eyes and minds met in that moment, she whispered, "With God's help, I will." Late that night, by flickering candlelight, Julia Ward Howe stared down at a stark white paper. The muted guns of the two great armies, testifying death and destruction, penetrated her being and pounded as sledges of hatred at her mind. Perhaps her thoughts related that night to another time and another besieged city. Perhaps she thought of Jericho and of Joshua and of God's prevailing victory. Whatever her thoughts, God inspired her that night. She picked up her quill pen, and the dark ink began to fill the white paper with words. Finally, the right words to old Bill Steff's melody. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored.
He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on.